The mafia boss receives a call at 2 a.m., his ex in labor with his baby. Only he can save her. The Romano mansion stood like a sleeping beast beneath the moonlight, marble pillars glistening under the soft glow, fountains whispering, and guards posted at every gate. Yet, inside those luxurious walls, there was only stillness, a silence that didn't comfort but clawed at the soul. In the heart of that silence sat Alessandro Romano, the most feared mafia boss in all of Italy. The man whose name alone made empires tremble, and whose eyes could decide whether a man lived or vanished forever. Yet tonight, those same eyes were fixed on a flickering candle beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. The study smelled of cigars, leather, and solitude. Golden frames of power hung on the walls, photos of deals sealed, victories won, and enemies buried. But amidst it all, one photograph faced downward on his desk, the only one he could never bear to look at. A soft rain began tapping against the tall windows. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair, the other gripping his glass tighter. The ice had melted long ago, leaving nothing but bitter warmth. 2 years. 2 long, brutal years since Elena Moretti walked out of his life. The one woman who had dared to see the man behind the monster, who had looked into his chaos and called it love. He had built empires since she left. Expanded territories. Doubled his wealth. Yet every night ended the same, with her name echoing in the hollow corners of his heart. He had convinced himself she was gone forever, until the shrill vibration of his phone shattered the quiet. The sound was sharp, urgent. He frowned. Annoyed at first, few dared to call him this late unless it was life or death. He reached for it, eyes narrowing at the unknown number flashing on the screen. "Romano," he answered, his voice cold and sharp like steel, but the voice on the other end trembled. "Mr. Romano? It's Elena. She's in the hospital." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. For a second, the world froze. Every beat of his heart felt heavier than the last. "What did you say?" he demanded, rising from his chair, his tone darker than the storm brewing outside. "She's asking for you," the voice said quickly, almost desperate. "It's bad, sir. She's in labor. And the doctors, they said only your blood type can save her and the baby." The words slammed into him like bullets. His blood type. Her baby. The phone nearly fell from his grip as his mind spun. Elena. In labor, and only he could save her. For a man who had faced death 100 times. Who had stared down assassins and betrayed kings. Alessandro Romano had never known fear, until that moment. He didn't think. He didn't breathe. He only moved. The heavy oak chair screeched against the marble as he shot up. His coat hung by the door, and he snatched it with trembling hands. The guards stationed outside the study straightened instantly when they saw his face. "Get the car," he barked. "Sir, it's 2 in the morning, now," he thundered. Within seconds, engines roared to life outside the mansion gates. Alessandro strode down the long hallways, his footsteps echoing like gunfire. The paintings of his ancestors watched him, proud, ruthless men who built dynasties on blood. But for once, he wasn't thinking of power or legacy. He was thinking of her, Elena, the woman with soft brown eyes and a smile that once made him believe he could be more than what he was. The woman who left him the day she discovered the truth of his empire, the killings, the corruption, the endless cycle of revenge. She had begged him to leave it all. He couldn't. And so she walked away, leaving behind silence and regret. Now fate had dragged him back toward her, not as a lover, not as a sinner, but as her last hope. Outside, the storm broke loose. Rain lashed against the black hood of his car as he climbed in. The driver's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as Alessandro barked the hospital's name. "Step on it." The car shot forward, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and gray. But his mind was miles away, replaying her laugh, her tears. The last words she said to him, "I can't raise a child in blood, Alessandro." The irony cut deep now. Her life, and their unborn child, depended on that same blood she had once run from. He pressed a hand to his chest as if to stop the ache spreading there. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. His money, his men, his empire, none of it could help him now. Only his presence could, only his blood could. Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection in the window, sharp jawline, dark eyes hollowed with guilt. Rain sliding down like tears he refused to shed. The driver glanced back once, hesitant. "Boss, are you all right?" Alessandro didn't answer. He only whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "She's not dying tonight. Not her." As the car sped through the storm, the city seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in a hospital room, Elena Moretti, the woman who once owned the heart of the most dangerous man in Italy, was fighting for her life, and for the first time in years. Alessandro Romano wasn't running toward power, vengeance, or control. He was running toward love, toward redemption, and toward a fate he could no longer escape. The hospital loomed ahead like a pale ghost in the storm. Its tall windows flickered with cold fluorescent light, standing in cruel contrast to the darkness surrounding it. The rain hammered down in furious rhythm, washing the streets clean, but nothing could wash away the fear rising in Alessandro's chest. The car skidded to a halt in front of the emergency entrance. Before the driver could open the door, Alessandro was already out, the rain soaking through his tailored black coat in seconds. Thunder rolled across the sky as he strode through the sliding doors, his shoes leaving wet marks on the polished floor. Inside, the sterile smell of antiseptic and medicine hit him like a wave. It was a world he didn't belong in, too bright, too fragile. Men like him belonged in shadows and marble halls, not in places built to save lives. The receptionist froze when she looked up and saw him. The notorious Alessandro Romano, in person, at 2 a.m, eyes wild and drenched in rain. For a moment, she couldn't even speak. He slammed his palm on the counter, his voice low but burning. "Elena Moretti. Where is she?" The nurse stammered, searching the records, her fingers trembling. "Room 307, maternity emergency." "But, sir, only family is allowed." "I am family," he snapped, his tone cutting like a blade. Then softer, his voice cracked just slightly, "She asked for me." Something in his eyes made her step aside without another word. He moved fast down the hallway, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The sterile white walls blurred as flashes of memories hit him, Elena smiling across a candlelit dinner, her laughter filling his penthouse balcony, her voice whispering, "Promise me you'll change. Ale. One day." But he never did, and now she was lying somewhere behind those doors, fighting for her life. When he reached the maternity wing, 2 guards in hospital security uniforms instinctively blocked his path. But before they could even speak, one look at the glint in Alessandro's eyes made them step aside. Inside, the sound of machines filled the air, rhythmic beeps and whispers of doctors behind curtains. The storm outside crashed against the glass, matching the storm inside him. A nurse passed by, whispering to another, "That's him. The father." He paused, his heart tightening. Father. The word hit differently this time. Not like a title, but a weight. A truth. He clenched his fists, walking deeper into the corridor until he reached room 307. The door was slightly open, and light spilled into the hallway. He could hear muffled voices inside, urgent, tense. "She's losing too much blood," one doctor said, "her pressure's dropping." Another voice cried, his stomach twisted. He stood frozen for a moment, his hand hovering near the doorframe, afraid that walking through it might make everything real. He had faced assassins, police raids, betrayals, but the thought of losing her made his knees weak. Finally, he pushed the door open. The sight inside stole his breath. Elena lay on the bed, pale as moonlight, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling. Tubes and wires surrounded her, machines beeping frantically. 2 nurses worked around her, one holding a blood bag, another checking her vitals. "Who are you?" the doctor demanded, turning sharply. Alessandro's voice came out hoarse, almost pleading. "I'm the one you called. The blood type match." The doctor's expression shifted instantly. "We've been waiting for you. She's critical. We need your blood now." Without hesitation, Alessandro pulled off his coat and rolled up his sleeve. "Do it." As the nurse prepared the equipment, his gaze never left Elena. She looked so fragile, a ghost of the woman he remembered. Her lips were slightly parted, whispering something faint. He stepped closer. "Elena." Her eyes fluttered open, weak, unfocused, but when they met his, she gasped softly. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Alessandro." His throat tightened. "I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm right here." For a moment, the world faded, the doctors, the beeping, the storm. It was just them. 2 souls who had loved and lost each other, brought back together by fate in the most fragile hour. A nurse tied a band around his arm. The needle pricked his skin, but he didn't flinch. Pain meant nothing anymore. The only thing that mattered was the faint rise and fall of Elena's chest that he could hear her breathing unevenly, struggling. Every sound stabbed through him. He wanted to tear the machines away, to hold her, to tell her everything he never said, how every night he looked at her picture. How every victory felt hollow without her. But all he could do was stand there, helpless. Watching his blood flow into the tubes that connected to her, the doctor murmured something to the nurse about the levels stabilizing, but Alessandro barely heard it. His entire focus was on Elena's hand lying still on the blanket. He reached out and gently took it. Her skin was cold, but it still felt like home. "I should have come sooner," he whispered under his breath. "I should have never let you go." Her lips trembled, barely forming words. I didn't want to die without seeing you." A tear rolled down his cheek, hidden by the shadows. "Don't talk like that. You're not dying, Elena. Not while I'm still breathing." Her eyes slowly closed again, exhaustion pulling her under. The machines beeped steadily, her heartbeat weak but alive. When the transfusion was over, the nurse carefully removed the line. Alessandro swayed slightly but didn't let go of her hand. The doctor looked at him with cautious respect. "You may have just saved her life." He said nothing. His body was numb, his mind spinning, but his heart, for the first time in years, was alive again. That he glanced at her face, memorizing every line, every freckle, every fragile breath. The woman he once lost to pride was lying before him, and for the first time, he realized, power meant nothing. All the money, all the empires, they couldn't give him what her presence did. In that one trembling moment, outside, the rain began to ease. The thunder softened into a distant hum. Alessandro Romano sat by her bedside, hand still wrapped around hers. Blood still warm in his veins. He didn't speak again. He didn't move. He just stayed there, silent, broken, and utterly human, waiting for her to open her eyes again. Rain still whispered against the hospital windows as Alessandro sat beside Elena's bed, his pulse matching the slow rhythm of the heart monitor. Each beep a fragile reminder of how close she hovered between life and death. Exhaustion pressed heavy on his shoulders, yet his eyes never left her face, tracing every faint movement of her lashes, every shallow breath that kept her tethered to him. The scent of antiseptic hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint trace of her perfume, jasmine and rain, the scent that had once clung to his shirts when nights ended in laughter instead of silence. In the sterile glow of the hospital room, memories he had buried clawed their way back, the sound of her laughter echoing across his penthouse. Her tears the night she discovered the truth. And that final moment when she stood at the door, whispering through trembling lips, "I can't raise a child in blood." Alessandro. He remembered the rage in her eyes that night, not born from hate, but from heartbreak. Now, watching her fragile and still, he realized the empire he built had never filled the emptiness she left. Guilt, sharp and merciless, tore through him. Every crime, every order, every drop of blood spilled for power now felt meaningless in the face of the one woman whose pain he had caused. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead, his voice barely a whisper, "You should have never had to suffer for my sins." Her lips parted, soft and trembling. "Alessandro. You came." The sound of his name from her voice broke him in ways bullets never could. "I never stopped loving you, Elena," he murmured, his thumb tracing the back of her hand as if memorizing her skin before fate stole her away again. But before her eyes could meet his, the monitor beside her screamed, a shrill, merciless sound, and doctors rushed in, shouting commands, pulling him back as chaos filled the room. "We're losing her," someone cried. Alessandro's world blurred. His heart pounded, his vision narrowed to her lifeless form surrounded by desperate hands. He pressed his palms together, something between prayer and madness in his voice. "Don't you dare take her from me." The storm outside roared. And within that blinding panic, one truth consumed him: no amount of power could save her. But he would give every drop of his blood, every breath, every piece of his soul to keep her alive. The steady hum of chaos echoed through the walls as Alessandro stood frozen, his pulse roaring in his ears while the doctors surrounded Elena like soldiers in a losing war. The bright hospital lights stabbed his eyes, turning every detail cruelly clear: the flash of metal instruments, the trembling hands of nurses, the crimson streak of his own blood still in the transfusion line. His chest burned with something far worse than fear. It was helplessness, raw and merciless, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy. The man who could bend governments, buy loyalty, and destroy enemies with a single command was now powerless before the fragile heartbeat of the woman he loved. Get more pressure on that line. A doctor shouted. Her vitals are dropping again. Alessandro's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream, to demand they fix her, but all he could do was stand there, every muscle rigid with desperation. The sound of the machines consumed him, the beeping, the suction, the soft gasps of the nurses as they fought to keep her alive. Time fractured into shards. Every second stretched longer than the last. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was one of his guards, Matteo, who had followed him in against orders. Boss, maybe you should step outside. Alessandro turned, his glare sharp enough to cut steel. Don't ever ask me to leave her again. His voice trembled, but it wasn't from anger, it was from fear. Matteo backed off silently, eyes down. He looked back at Elena, her lips pale, her skin ghost-like under the harsh lights. It felt unreal, as if the universe had decided to punish him for every sin at once. He could still hear her laughter from years ago, the gentle sound that had once brought light into his dark world. It haunted him now like a melody from a dream he could never return to. Her blood pressures dropping. The doctor shouted again. We need more oxygen. Alessandro moved closer, ignoring the protests of the nurses. Do whatever it takes, he said, his tone low but commanding. If you need equipment, I'll buy the whole damn hospital. Sir, please, do it. His voice thundered, shaking everyone in the room. Then softer, almost breaking, just, don't let her go. The doctor didn't argue. They kept working, and Alessandro sank into the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. The blood on his hands, figurative and literal, now felt like a curse. For years, he told himself everything he did was for survival, for power. But now, watching Elena fight for breath, he finally saw what he had destroyed along the way. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, it raged harder than ever. The rain tapped against the window like faint whispers of memory. He remembered the night he first told her he loved her, on a balcony overlooking Rome, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. He had promised her peace. She had smiled sadly, as if she already knew that peace was the one thing he could never give. His throat tightened. He looked at her again, the woman who once made him believe in redemption, now slipping away because of the world he had dragged her into. A nurse leaned over the doctor, whispering, "We're stabilizing." Heart rates climbing back. Alessandro exhaled, his chest finally releasing the air he didn't realize he'd been holding. The doctor wiped sweat from his forehead and turned to him. She's weak, but she's fighting. We're not out of danger yet. He nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. She's always been a fighter. He stood, stepping closer to the bed, looking down at her face, still pale but breathing, her chest rising faintly under the white sheets. His fingers brushed the edge of her blanket, trembling slightly. The chaos had died down, but his heart hadn't. It beat with the rhythm of regret and love, tangled in ways he couldn't untangle. He sat again, pulling the chair closer. The room was dimmer now. The lights had softened, the storm clouds outside giving way to a pale, tired dawn. The scent of rain drifted through the open window, carrying the faintest sense of renewal, or maybe, he thought bitterly, false hope. Elena's lips parted, and she murmured something he couldn't hear. He leaned closer, brushing her hair away gently. Shoo, he whispered, his voice cracking. You're safe. I'm here. Her eyelids fluttered, just for a second, as if her soul was deciding whether to stay or leave. Then, faintly, she whispered, You shouldn't be here. He froze. Those words, frail and broken, hit him like a gunshot. I should have been here years ago, he whispered back. Every night I thought about you, Elena. Every single night. Her brow furrowed weakly, her lips trembling. You chose your world. He swallowed hard, guilt twisting his insides. I thought I could protect you by keeping you away. But I only hurt you more. A faint tear escaped the corner of her eye, sliding down her temple. You can't fix what's broken, Alessandro. He gently caught the tear with his thumb. Then I'll rebuild it, he murmured. Even if it kills me. Her breathing steadied slightly, her body relaxing as if those words, however impossible, gave her a moment of peace. The machines quieted into a steady rhythm again, and for the first time in hours, the chaos dulled into stillness. He sat there in silence, watching her sleep, his own eyes heavy with exhaustion. But he refused to close them. He had spent 2 years avoiding his ghosts, pretending power could fill the emptiness she left. Now, sitting in that cold hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the faint light of dawn, he realized how wrong he had been. Every empire he built, every throne he sat upon, none of it meant anything compared to this one fragile heartbeat that tethered him to the world. He reached for her hand again, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I don't care what it takes," he whispered softly, his eyes glistening. "I'll stay until you open your eyes again. And when you do, I'll never let you go." Outside, the first rays of morning light broke through the clouds, slipping through the blinds and casting golden lines across her face. He stared at her, memorizing that fragile beauty. The soft curve of her lips, the faint color returning to her cheeks, for the first time since she left. Alessandro felt something he thought he had buried long ago, hope, not the kind born from power or fear, but from love, fragile, imperfect, and painfully real. And as the world outside began to wake, Alessandro Romano, the man feared by many, sat quietly in the small hospital room, praying not for strength, not for vengeance, but simply for one more chance to love her right. Under the thin wash of dawn light, the room seemed suspended between life and silence. The monitors hummed low, the rain had turned to a whisper against the windows, and Alessandro stood motionless beside the bed, sleeves rolled up, veins visible beneath his skin. The doctor's words echoed in his head, "Her blood's not holding. She's crashing again." Without another breath of hesitation, he stepped forward, voice low but absolute, the tone of a man used to command, "Take mine." The nurse stuttered, eyes wide with alarm. "Sir, the compatibility test." He cut her off with a glance sharp enough to stop the protest in her throat. "Do it." He didn't wait for permission. His fingers tore at the fine cotton of his shirt sleeve, fabric ripping in the tense quiet, a sound that seemed to split the air itself. A nurse tied the tubing around his arm, her hands shaking as the needle found its mark. Blood, dark and warm, began to flow. The same blood that had once built an empire of fear now streamed steadily into the veins of the woman who had once called him her heart. Alessandro watched it leave him with a strange calm, a surrender he had never known. Each pulse felt like a confession, each drop a memory. He saw flashes, Elena laughing in the morning light, her hair tangled from sleep. The way she'd rest her head on his chest after long nights, whispering dreams of a future he'd been too blind to chase. His jaw clenched as emotion burned behind his eyes. "You always said my heart was cold," he whispered, voice trembling like the rain outside. "Maybe now it'll finally warm you." No one in the room moved for a moment. Even the doctors seemed to sense the gravity in his words. The transfusion continued, time stretching into eternity. The sterile beeping of machines became his only rhythm, marking seconds like quiet prayers. He refused to look away, refused to blink, as though keeping his eyes on her would anchor her to this world. His vision blurred, not from pain but from the haunting mix of exhaustion and love that pulled at him from within. Minutes bled into hours. The room dimmed as fatigue washed over him, but still he sat, the needle in his arm, the tubing linking their lives together like a vow written in blood. At one point the nurse whispered, "Sir, you've given enough," but Alessandro only shook his head. "I'll stop when she breathes on her own." His voice was rough, gravelly from hours of silence. But it carried the kind of devotion that silenced every protest. Then something shifted, so subtle at first he thought he imagined it. The rhythmic beeping steadied. The sharp peaks on the monitor began to smooth out, each beat stronger than the last. The nurse leaned forward, whispering urgently to the doctor. "Her pressure's climbing. It's working." A breath shuddered out of Alessandro's chest, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to hope. He turned his gaze back to her face, her lashes trembling faintly, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "That's it, amore mio," he murmured softly, voice cracking. "Come back to me." But the strength it took to save her had drained him to the edge of collapse. His skin had gone pale, his vision clouded, but he didn't care. The nurse hurried to remove the line from his arm, pressing gauze to the wound, but Alessandro barely noticed. His body swayed forward as fatigue pulled him down, and before he could resist, the world tilted into darkness. Silence followed, the kind that comes after storms, deep and endless. When Alessandro opened his eyes again, everything was hazy, bathed in soft afternoon light. The room was quiet now, the machines calmer, their sounds steady and rhythmic. He felt weak, his arm sore, the bandage tight around it. A dull ache spread through his chest, but it wasn't pain, it was relief trying to find its place. He turned his head slowly, every muscle stiff, searching instinctively for her. And there she was, Elena, lying peacefully on the bed beside him, her breathing slow, her lips no longer pale but touched with faint color. The sight stole the air from his lungs. He tried to sit up, but the nurse, noticing he was awake, rushed to his side. "Easy, Mr. Romano," she said gently. "You've lost a lot of blood. You need rest." His voice was rough, barely audible. "Elena, and the baby?" A small, knowing smile curved her lips. "Both alive," she said softly, her tone carrying the warmth of something sacred. "You saved them." For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened as the words sank in, heavy and unreal. He turned his head toward Elena again, eyes glistening. Her hand rested beside her, delicate and still, but warm. He reached out, fingers brushing hers, needing to feel that she was real, that she was here. His lips parted, a whisper escaping, "You're safe." The nurse adjusted the blanket around her, her voice quiet but filled with quiet awe. "You stayed with her the entire time," she said. "Even when you should have passed out hours ago." He gave a faint, tired smile. "A Romano doesn't leave what he loves behind." The words came from deep within him, not as pride but as truth, raw and unpolished. He leaned back against the pillow, eyes never leaving Elena's face. The sunlight spilling through the window turned her hair into threads of gold, soft and alive. She looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos that had nearly taken her. For the first time in years, the air around him felt light. Almost forgiving. He thought of the nights he had spent haunted by her absence. The endless ache of wondering where she was, who she was with. Whether she hated him or still remembered the man he used to be before the blood and the power consumed him. And now, fate had placed her beside him again, not as punishment, but perhaps as a chance. He whispered under his breath, his voice almost prayer-like, "If there's a God watching." "Thank you." The nurse smiled faintly, adjusting the four. "She'll wake soon," she said softly. "When she does, she'll want to see you." Alessandro closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a shaky breath. "Then I'll be right here when she does." The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now, no longer heavy or cruel, but filled with the gentle hum of peace. The monitors pulsed softly, the world outside glowed with new light. And within that fragile calm, Alessandro Romano realized something that hit deeper than any wound he'd ever taken. He had spent his life drawing blood to survive, to rule, to dominate. But the first time his blood had truly meant something was when it saved the woman he loved. And as his head leaned back against the white hospital pillow, exhaustion claiming him once more, his fingers still brushed against hers, a silent vow written not in words but in the shared heartbeat between them. The hours passed softly, like the world was holding its breath. The quiet inside the hospital room was broken only by the rhythmic sound of machines and the soft whisper of rain against the window. Alessandro sat there, still pale, eyes locked on Elena's sleeping form. Every rise and fall of her chest was proof that she was alive, that he hadn't lost her again. He leaned back in the chair beside her bed. His body heavy with exhaustion, the faint scent of antiseptic filled the air. Yet beneath it lingered something sweeter, her perfume, still faintly clinging to the air like a memory refusing to fade. He reached up, brushing his fingers across his bandaged arm, the sting reminding him of the price he'd paid. But to him, it wasn't a price at all, it was redemption. For years, Alessandro Romano had lived with iron in his veins and ice in his heart. He'd built an empire from shadows, ruled through fear, and destroyed anyone who dared to stand against him. But sitting here, watching the woman he loved fight for breath, none of that power mattered. All he wanted was the sound of her voice again, the softness of her laughter, the things he never realized were home until they were gone. The door opened quietly. A nurse peeked in, carrying a small blanket. "She's stable now," she whispered, offering a kind smile. "You should rest too, Mr. Romano." He gave a faint nod, though he didn't move. "I'll rest when she wakes." The nurse hesitated for a moment, sensing the unspoken emotion behind his calm tone. "She's lucky," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't give that much blood. Not without thinking of the risk." He looked up, his dark eyes weary but steady. "She's not most people," he murmured. "She's my everything." After she left, the room fell into silence again. Alessandro stood slowly, his legs weak beneath him, and stepped closer to Elena's bedside. He brushed a stray strand of hair away from her face, his hand trembling. "You fought harder than I ever did," he whispered. "Even after I broke your heart." His voice cracked as he exhaled. The memories returned, uninvited, the last night they'd been together. She had stood in this very city, rain pouring down, her voice breaking as she said, "I can't raise a child in your world of blood." And then she had walked away. He had let her. Because back then, he thought love was weakness. Now he knew it was the only thing that had ever made him human. The monitor beside her gave a soft beep, and Elena stirred faintly. Alessandro froze. Her fingers twitched, a small movement, barely visible, but it hit him like a gunshot. He leaned forward, his heart hammering in his chest. "Elena?" he whispered, voice trembling, her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the light. For a long, fragile moment, she seemed lost, caught between dream and waking. Then her gaze found him. Her lips parted, a weak, breathy sound escaping. "You came." The words were barely there, fragile as glass. He caught her hand instantly, pressing it to his lips. "I'd walk through fire for you," he whispered. "You know that." Tears glimmered at the corners of her eyes. "You shouldn't have." "I had to," he cut her off softly. "You and the baby, you're all that's left of the good in me." Her breathing hitched, a soft sob escaping her. "Alessandro." He leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers gently. "Rest now," he murmured. "You're safe. I'm here." For the first time in 2 years, peace settled between them, fragile but real. The walls that had once kept them apart, built by lies and fear, seemed to crumble in that moment. Her hand gripped his weakly, but he could feel her warmth. It was enough. Minutes passed before she drifted back into sleep. Alessandro stayed where he was, his fingers still wrapped around hers. His mind wandered to the baby, their child, the one she had fought to protect. A pang of fear crossed his chest. He hadn't asked about the baby's condition since waking up. What if something was wrong? Just then, the door opened again, and a doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Romano," he said quietly, "you should be proud. Both mother and child are stable now." Alessandro straightened, relief flooding his face. "The baby? Is healthy?" The doctor smiled faintly. "A little weak, but strong enough to make it through the night. You can see him soon." For the first time in years, Alessandro felt something break open inside him, a feeling he hadn't known since before his father died, before the Mafia had swallowed his life. It was hope. Raw and unfiltered. "Thank you, doctor," he said quietly, his voice thick. The doctor nodded and left, leaving him once again in the quiet glow of the room. Alessandro turned back to Elena, his heart heavy but full. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "You gave me something worth saving again." He sat down, exhaustion washing over him like a tide. The soft light from the window brushed across her face, painting her in gold. She looked like a miracle he didn't deserve. His gaze lingered on her, memorizing every detail, the curve of her lips, the way her lashes fluttered when she dreamed. He realized how close he had come to losing her forever. And in that moment, Alessandro made a silent promise, the kind of oath that only a man who has seen death up close can make. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver pendant she had once given him. The one he had never taken off, even after she left. Inside it was her photograph, slightly worn, but still radiant. He placed it gently on the bedside table beside her. "From now on," he whispered, "no blood, no war. I swear it on the life you've given back to me." His words hung in the air. Soft but binding, a blood oath not written on paper, but sealed in the veins that had kept her alive. The rain outside stopped, replaced by the faint call of morning birds. Light spilled gently through the clouds, illuminating the room with a fragile glow. For the first time in years, the world outside the Romano mansion, the one he'd built with bullets and fear, seemed distant. Unimportant. All that mattered was here, the woman he'd nearly lost. And the life they'd created together. And as he sat there in silence, Hand still clasping hers, Alessandro felt something he hadn't felt in a lifetime. Not power. Not control, but peace. The morning sun broke through the thin hospital curtains, casting pale gold across the room. The world outside was waking, but inside, time still felt suspended, fragile and tender. Alessandro Romano sat by the window, his hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the soft rise and fall of Elena's chest. The faint rhythm of her breathing soothed him more than any sound ever could. It had been hours since the doctors told him that both mother and child were safe. Yet Alessandro couldn't bring himself to leave the room. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of her fading in that sterile white light, her voice weak and trembling as she whispered his name. He had lived through gunfire, betrayal, and war, but nothing had ever terrified him the way her silence had. Now, with the soft hum of machines and the smell of disinfectant hanging in the air, he finally allowed himself to breathe. His hand brushed against the pendant she once gave him, lying on the bedside table. Its silver gleam caught the sunlight, and he smiled faintly, the same small, rare smile he used to give her when she'd tease him for being too serious. "Do you remember," he whispered quietly, "how you used to say I didn't know what real strength was? Maybe you were right, Elena. Maybe this is what strength really looks like." Elena stirred slightly, her lashes fluttering as she fought her way back to consciousness. Alessandro leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. Slowly, her eyes opened, dazed, soft, filled with confusion and light. For a moment she didn't recognize where she was. Then she saw him, her lips curved faintly, weak but real. "Alessandro." He exhaled shakily, rising to his feet. "I'm here," he said, his voice low, tender. "You're safe now." She blinked slowly, memories flooding back, the pain, the fear, the moment before darkness swallowed her whole. "The baby?" she breathed, panic sparking in her eyes. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "He's alive," he whispered. "Our son is alive." Her breath caught. Tears welled instantly, spilling down her cheeks. She turned her face slightly toward the window, her voice trembling. "I thought I lost him." "You almost did," he admitted quietly, emotion tightening his throat. "But you were stronger than any of us. You fought for him." Her hand squeezed his weakly. "And you? You saved me." He looked down at her, eyes dark and soft all at once. "You saved me first, amore mio," he said. "I just returned the favor." She smiled faintly through tears, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time, trust. There had been a time when she couldn't even say his name without pain. Now, his presence felt like the only thing keeping her anchored to this world. A soft knock interrupted the moment. A nurse stepped inside, her expression bright with gentle warmth. "Mrs. Moretti, Mr. Romano," she said softly, "would you like to see your baby?" Elena's breath hitched. Her trembling fingers tightened around Alessandro's. He helped her sit up slowly, adjusting the pillow behind her back. Every movement was careful, almost reverent. The nurse disappeared briefly, then returned, holding a small, wrapped bundle in her arms. The air in the room shifted instantly, thick with emotion. The nurse's smile softened as she lowered the newborn gently into Elena's arms. A quiet, fragile sound filled the air, a small whimper, delicate but alive. Elena gasped, tears streaming freely now. "Oh my God!" she whispered, staring at the tiny face nestled against her chest. Alessandro froze. For the first time in his life, the man who had faced death without blinking felt his heart stumble. He stepped closer, drawn to the fragile life that bore both his name and his redemption. The baby moved slightly, a small fist curling near his mother's hand. Elena looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "He has your eyes," she said softly. Alessandro's breath caught. He knelt beside the bed, reaching out with trembling fingers. The baby's tiny hand instinctively wrapped around his finger, small, warm, impossibly soft. The world seemed to blur around him. "I never thought." His voice broke. He swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "I never thought I'd deserve to touch something this pure." Elena smiled faintly, her gaze tender. "You're his father, Alessandro. You saved his life." He shook his head slightly, his jaw tightening. "I've taken so much from this world, Elena. Maybe this? Maybe he's the only good thing I'll ever give back." She placed her free hand gently against his cheek, forcing him to look at her. "Then let that be enough." Her words hit deeper than any bullet ever could. For a long moment, Alessandro simply stared at her, the woman he once believed he had lost forever. The weight of everything he'd done, every sin, every scar, pressed against him. Yet her eyes, tired and full of love, made him feel like maybe redemption wasn't just a dream. The baby stirred again, letting out a small, broken cry. The sound pierced the air, high, raw, and beautiful. Elena gasped softly, rocking him instinctively. "He's crying," she whispered, tears glimmering. Alessandro felt his chest tighten as the sound echoed through the room. That single cry, so fragile, yet so powerful, felt like it shattered the walls of his soul. He had heard the cries of men begging for mercy, the screams of enemies meeting their end. But this sound. This was life. The nurse smiled from the doorway, watching the family silently. "He's strong," she said quietly. "That cry means he's going to be just fine." Elena looked down at her son again, whispering softly. "He's perfect." Alessandro couldn't speak. He sat there, eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms, his child, his blood, his miracle. For a long while, the three of them stayed in that moment. No past, no future, only the quiet heartbeat of a new beginning. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "He'll never know our world," he whispered. "Not the way I did." Elena nodded, her tears falling onto the baby's blanket. "Promise me, Alessandro," she whispered, "promise he'll never live in shadows." He met her gaze, eyes steady, voice low but firm. "I swear on my life," he said. "No more blood. No more darkness. Only light, for him, for you, for us." The baby let out another soft cry, almost as if sealing the promise. Alessandro leaned forward and kissed his tiny forehead, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, his heart felt clean, stripped of the empire, the violence, the guilt. The sound of his son's breathing filled the room, and for once, the mafia boss who had lived by blood and fear bowed his head to something greater, love. The world outside moved on, cars hummed. Nurses hurried through white corridors, and sunlight stretched across the city. But inside that small hospital room, time seemed frozen. The moment the baby's soft cry faded into quiet breathing, everything changed. Alessandro sat beside the bed, one arm resting protectively around Elena as she held their newborn son. His body was still weak, his arm bandaged from the transfusion, but none of that mattered. Every breath he took now had a reason, a heartbeat that wasn't his own, but one he'd die for without hesitation. Elena watched the tiny bundle in her arms with a mix of awe and disbelief. "He's so small," she whispered, her fingers tracing the baby's cheek. "So fragile. I was so afraid I'd never see him." Alessandro leaned closer, his voice soft, reverent. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." She looked up, her tired eyes glistening. "I didn't feel strong, Alessandro. I felt alone. Scared. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving you, but every night I wondered, what if you had changed?" He paused, his gaze falling to the child. "I did change," he said quietly. "But too late." Her lips trembled as she looked at him. "You were the man I loved, but you were also the man I feared. I didn't want our child to grow up in blood." Alessandro's chest tightened. "I know," he whispered. "That's why he won't. I'm done with that world. Elena. I swear it on his life." For a long moment, she studied him, the man she once couldn't trust, now sitting beside her with tears in his eyes and a trembling hand on their son's blanket. The Alessandro she had known years ago had been cold, ruthless, untouchable. But the man before her now? He was human again. "You mean that?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes unwavering. "I mean every word. I've built an empire on fear, and it cost me everything that ever mattered. If walking away from it means keeping you both safe, then I'll burn it all to the ground myself." Elena's lips parted, emotion catching in her throat. She reached out, her hand brushing his cheek, thumb tracing the faint scar near his jaw. "I used to hate that you could be so calm in chaos," she whispered. "But now, I see it's because you never had anything to fight for." He turned his face slightly, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Now I do," he murmured. "And I'll fight the whole world if I have to." The baby stirred softly, a small cry bubbling in his throat. Elena shifted him gently, humming a soft lullaby under her breath, the same melody her mother used to sing to her as a child. The sound filled the room like light, wrapping around Alessandro's heart until he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Peace. He rose slowly, walking to the window. Outside, the streets of Rome were wet from the morning rain. Life moved on as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything had. The city that had once belonged to him now felt distant, irrelevant. Power suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the quiet miracle lying in the bed. As he stared out at the skyline, his phone buzzed on the bedside table, a name flashing on the screen: Luca. His right-hand man. The one who handled his empire in his absence. Alessandro hesitated. The sound felt like a ghost from another life. He stared at it for a long time before pressing the green button. "Boss," Luca's voice came, low and cautious. "You've been gone all night. The Russians are moving in on the docks. What are your orders?" For a moment, Alessandro said nothing. He turned, his eyes falling on Elena, asleep now, the baby curled against her chest. He thought of the promise he had just made. His voice, when it came, was calm but final. "There are no orders," he said. Luca went silent. "What do you mean?" "I'm done," Alessandro said firmly. "Shut it all down, Luca. Every operation, every shipment. Tell the men the Romano family is finished." The silence on the other end was heavy, disbelief thick in the air. "Boss, you can't just walk away. They'll come for you." Alessandro's gaze softened as he looked at his son. "Then let them come," he said quietly. "They'll find a man with nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting." He ended the call before Luca could reply. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders for years seemed to lift in that instant. He walked back to the bed, sinking into the chair beside Elena once more. For a while, he simply watched them, mother and child, bound by something pure and untouchable. The baby's tiny fingers gripped Elena's gown, his lips twitching in his sleep. Alessandro smiled faintly. "He looks like you when he sleeps," he whispered. Elena's eyes fluttered open at his voice. "Then he'll be stubborn like you," she teased softly, her tone weak but warm. He chuckled quietly, a sound she hadn't heard in years. It was deep and real, stripped of pride. "God help us if he is," he said. She smiled, eyes glimmering. "You'll be a good father, Alessandro." He shook his head slightly. "I don't know how to be one." "Then learn with me," she whispered. "He deserves both of us." Those words struck something deep inside him. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying." The nurse entered briefly, checking Elena's vitals. "He's strong," she said with a smile, glancing at the baby. "He's already turning his head when you talk, Mr. Romano. He knows your voice." Alessandro froze for a heartbeat, his throat tightening. "He knows me?" The nurse nodded, still smiling. "Babies recognize the sound of the people they love." Her words lingered long after she left. He stared at his son in awe, the realization washing over him like a tide. This tiny soul, this new life, already knew him. Despite all his sins, all his darkness, he was still someone's light. The baby stirred again, his soft cry echoing through the room. Elena smiled weakly. "He's hungry," she said. Alessandro reached out instinctively, touching the child's tiny hand. The warmth of that connection filled him with something fierce and unexplainable. "He's perfect," he murmured. Elena looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "What should we name him?" He met her gaze, thinking for a moment before saying softly, "Gabriel." Her lips curved into a smile. "Gabriel Romano," she repeated, the name rolling like a promise. "It's beautiful." He nodded slowly, emotion thick in his chest. "It means, God is my strength," he said. "Seems fitting, doesn't it?" She smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Because that's exactly what he is, our strength." The baby let out a soft sigh and drifted back to sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with theirs. The golden light from the window wrapped around them like a blessing. And for the first time since he could remember, Alessandro felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The soft morning light barely touched the edges of the Romano mansion when Alessandro's world shifted again. For a brief moment, life had begun to look almost normal, too quiet, too peaceful for a man who had built his empire on chaos. Elena and their newborn rested in a small hospital room protected by his most trusted men, their breaths gentle, innocent, untouched by the darkness that had shaped his soul. But that peace shattered the moment his right-hand man, Marco, burst through the door, his face pale beneath the dim corridor lights. They know, Marco said, voice tight. The Vescuri found out, about her, about the baby. They're already moving. The words hit Alessandro like a blade between the ribs. His fingers curled into fists, veins tightening as years of instinct roared to life inside him. How, he demanded, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. Someone talked. Maybe someone inside, Marco replied, glancing toward the door where Elena slept. They've been watching the hospital. It's only a matter of time before they come for her. Alessandro didn't hesitate. Fear wasn't in his nature, but love had a way of making even the strongest men tremble. He looked toward the hospital window where the city lights bled through the rain. Then we'll be ready, he said. No one touches them. Not this time. He adjusted the cuffs of his black shirt, slid his gun into the holster, and stepped into the hallway. Every man stationed outside straightened at his presence, the silent authority of a man who had once ruled the underworld with nothing but a stare. But this night was different. He wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for love, for family, for redemption. When he returned to Elena's room, the sight of her asleep beside the baby softened something deep inside him. Her hand rested lightly on their child's chest, a quiet shield of love stronger than any bulletproof glass. Alessandro stood there for a long moment, his heart torn between two worlds, the ruthless life he'd built, and the fragile peace he wanted to protect. Elena, he whispered, brushing her hair back. Her eyes fluttered open, sleepy, warm, but filled with that same spark that had always tamed his storms. You're leaving, aren't you? She asked softly. He nodded once, unable to lie to her. I have to. They're coming for us. I won't let them near you. Tears welled in her eyes. Alessandro, you can't do this alone, he silenced her with a gentle touch to her lips. You gave me something worth dying for. Now let me fight for it. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Alessandro stepped into the cold night, his black coat whipping behind him as the storm began to break. The hospital lights glowed in the distance like a fragile beacon, a reminder of everything he stood to lose. Hours passed in tense silence. His men moved like shadows around the perimeter, setting up barricades and checking ammunition. Every sound, every flicker of movement made Alessandro's pulse tighten. His instinct screamed that this was more than just a threat, it was revenge. When the first car appeared on the horizon, headlights slicing through the rain, he knew the Vescuri had come. Black SUVs rolled to a stop at the far end of the street, doors opening in unison. Armed men stepped out, guns gleaming under the streetlights. Positions. Alessandro barked, his voice echoing through the storm. The first shot cracked through the night, glass shattering, alarms screaming. Alessandro ducked behind a car, returning fire with deadly precision. His men spread out, taking cover as the street erupted into chaos. Rain mixed with gunpowder, smoke curling through the air like ghosts of the past. Every time he fired, he thought of Elena's smile, of the baby's tiny fingers curling around his own. Each bullet was more than vengeance, it was a promise. You will not take my family. One of his men fell beside him, blood staining the pavement. Alessandro didn't flinch. He pushed forward, taking out two attackers in quick succession. He moved with ruthless efficiency, the way only a man with nothing left to lose could. As the fight dragged on, he felt a searing pain in his side, a bullet grazing his ribs, but he kept going, adrenaline drowning out the agony. He pressed his hand against the wound, gritting his teeth. Marco's voice crackled over the earpiece. They're falling back. We're pushing them out. Alessandro wiped the rain from his face, eyes scanning the smoke-filled street. Bodies littered the ground, some his, most theirs. But one car still idled at the corner, engine running. Through the foggy windshield, he caught a glimpse of a man watching him, a scar across his jaw, eyes burning with recognition. Luciano Vescuri. The ghost from his past, their gazes locked, a silent war reigniting in a single glance. Then the car peeled away into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of fire and shattered glass. Alessandro stood in the pouring rain, his breathing ragged, his body trembling from pain and rage. The war wasn't over. But for tonight, his family was safe. That was all that mattered. He turned, limping back toward the hospital as dawn began to break over the horizon. The rain washed the blood from his hands, but not from his soul. Every step hurt, but the image of Elena holding their child pulled him forward. When he reached the entrance, Marco rushed toward him. Boss, you're bleeding. Alessandro brushed him off with a weak smile. I've bled worse. Make sure the perimeter's secure. No one gets in without my word. Inside the hospital, everything was still. The chaos outside felt like another world entirely. He paused at the door to Elena's room, hand trembling slightly as he pushed it open. Elena looked up from the bed, her eyes wide with fear and relief. You're hurt, she gasped. He smiled faintly, sinking into the chair beside her. It's done, he whispered. You're safe now. Her tears fell silently as she took his hand, pressing it against her heart. You always find your way back to me. He brushed a kiss across her forehead, the storm fading behind him. Always. The hospital room was quiet again, but the silence felt heavier than before. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the faint hum of the city at dawn. Alessandro sat slumped in the chair beside Elena's bed, his shirt torn and blood seeping through the bandage Marco had hastily wrapped around his side. His breathing was shallow, uneven, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the sight before him, Elena holding their baby close. Whispering softly as the morning light touched her face, "You should be resting," she said. Her voice trembling as she noticed the fresh blood soaking through his bandage. He forced a smile, though his vision wavered. "I'll rest when I'm sure you're safe." Elena frowned, reaching for his hand. "You're bleeding, Alessandro. Please, let the doctors." He shook his head. "No doctors. Not here. Not until I know they're gone for good." His tone was soft, but beneath it lay the iron edge that had built his empire. Still, the defiance faded quickly when her eyes met his, eyes that always had a way of breaking through his walls. "Elena," he said after a long silence, his voice low. "When I was out there, every bullet that flew past me, I thought about you. About the nights I wasted chasing power when all I ever needed was this." Her lips quivered, tears brimming as she whispered, "You think I didn't dream of you, too? Every night I wondered if the man I loved was still somewhere under all that darkness." He exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead against her hand. He was there. Just lost. Until tonight. The baby stirred between them, a soft sound that made Alessandro's chest ache in ways he hadn't known possible. He reached out with trembling fingers, touching the tiny hand that grasped his thumb instinctively. For a man who had once ruled with fear, it was strange how something so small could command his entire world, but peace never lingered long in Alessandro's life. The door creaked open, and Marco stepped in quietly, his expression grave. "Boss," he said, glancing toward Elena, "we found something." Alessandro straightened, ignoring the stab of pain in his ribs. "What is it?" Marco hesitated before placing a small envelope on the table. It was damp from the rain, the paper torn at the corners. Inside was a single photo, a shot taken from a distance, grainy but clear enough to send a chill down Alessandro's spine. It was Elena, standing in the hospital garden 2 days earlier, the baby carriage beside her. On the back of the photo, in scrawled ink, were 4 words, "The debt isn't paid." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Alessandro, what does that mean?" He stared at the photo for a long moment, jaw tightening. "It means Luciano's not finished." Marco's voice was low. "We killed most of his men, but he slipped away. He's planning something. I can feel it." Elena's face paled. "You said it was over." "I thought it was," Alessandro admitted. "But men like Luciano don't stop. Not until one of us is in the ground." The room fell silent. Outside, the first rays of dawn stretched across the city, painting the skyline in muted gold. Alessandro rose slowly, wincing as his wound burned. "Marco, double the guards. I want eyes on every corner of this hospital. If he tries again, I want him taken alive." Marco nodded, then glanced at him with concern. "And you, boss? You can barely stand." Alessandro's lips curved into a grim smile. "I've stood through worse." When Marco left, the room felt colder, the air thick with unspoken fear. Elena looked at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You promised me this life was behind you. You said you were done with blood." He walked to her slowly, his steps heavy but determined. "And I meant it," he said, voice breaking. "But I can't erase the past overnight, Elena. The choices I made, they don't disappear just because I want them to. But I'll protect you. I'll protect him." She met his gaze, her tears shining in the light. "Even if it costs you your life?" He smiled faintly. If it means you both live? Then it's a price I'll pay without hesitation. Elena reached out, pulling him down beside her. For the first time in years, Alessandro allowed himself to rest, her warmth, her heartbeat, and the baby's soft breathing the only proof that he'd done something right in this cursed life. His eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion claiming him. But before he drifted into sleep, he whispered, "If I don't make it out of this war, promise me one thing, don't let our child grow up in fear." She pressed her forehead against his. "Don't talk like that. You will make it. You always do." Hours later, the hospital corridors fell into uneasy stillness. Outside, Marco's men kept watch, scanning the rooftops and alleyways. But none of them noticed the shadow that lingered across the street, a man in a dark coat, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Luciano Vescari watched the hospital with cold, patient eyes, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Enjoy your family, Romano," he murmured into the dawn air. "Because I'm coming to take it all." Inside, unaware of the predator lurking in the distance, Alessandro slept beside Elena and their baby, the calm before the storm. His breathing was steady, his hand resting protectively on the edge of the cradle. For the first time in years, there was peace on his face. But in the quiet corner of the room, the envelope with the photo still lay open, a silent warning that their past hadn't finished with them yet, and as the morning light touched his scarred knuckles, Alessandro's heart whispered a vow into the fading silence: "No matter the cost, I'll end this." Once and for all the weeks passed, and for the first time in years, silence didn't mean danger. It meant peace. The Romano estate, once haunted by the echoes of gunfire and the cold footsteps of men in suits, now carried a softer rhythm, laughter, lullabies, the faint hum of life returning. Elena sat in the garden beneath a canopy of olive trees, the morning sun kissing her skin as the baby, little Luca, giggled in her arms. His laughter danced with the wind, and for a moment, the world felt untouched by the shadows that once defined them. She leaned back in the wooden chair, eyes closed, inhaling the scent of fresh roses that had begun to bloom after years of neglect. The mansion, once a fortress of fear, had become a home again. Inside, Alessandro stood by the window, watching them. He wasn't the man the world had feared anymore, the calculating boss who ruled with silence and shadows. The man who once walked through corridors lined with guards now found himself lost in the simple sight of his son's tiny hands reaching for butterflies. His reflection in the glass no longer carried the same hardness. His eyes, once sharp and cold, now softened at every sound of Elena's voice. Marco entered quietly behind him. "Everything's secured, boss." No word from the Vescari since that night. "Don't call me that," Alessandro said, his tone calm but firm. Marco blinked, confused. "Sir?" He turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Boss. Don. Whatever title they used. That life's over. It dies with the blood we buried that night." Marco studied him for a moment, the man who had once ruled half of Italy's underworld now dressed in a simple white shirt. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, a faint scar peeking through where the bullet had grazed him weeks before. "Understood," Marco said finally. "You've earned your peace." As Marco left, Alessandro looked out the window again. The sight of Elena with their child drew him outside, his footsteps slow, deliberate, as though afraid to disturb the quiet that had taken root around them. Elena turned when she heard him approach. The sunlight caught his face, revealing lines of exhaustion but also serenity, the kind that only comes after surviving every storm. He stood behind her for a moment, just watching, before leaning down and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I spent my life saving my empire," he whispered, his voice raw, "but tonight, you and Luca saved my soul." Elena looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Maybe now," she said softly, "we can build something worth protecting." Her words struck something deep in him. He knelt beside her, taking her hand, rough, scarred fingers closing around her delicate ones. "No more blood," he said, his voice trembling with conviction. "No more ghosts. Just family." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief. She brushed her thumb across his knuckles. "I never wanted to change you, Alessandro. I just wanted you to see that you could be more than what the world made you." He smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You didn't change me, Elena. You reminded me who I was before all this, before power made me forget what mattered." Little Luca cooed, clutching at his father's finger, his laughter pure and unknowing. Alessandro felt his throat tighten. He'd commanded armies of men without fear, faced death countless times, yet the sound of his son's laugh was the only thing that ever made him tremble. He lifted the baby gently, holding him up against the sunlight. "You have your mother's smile," he murmured, smiling as Luca's eyes blinked open, full of innocence. "Let's hope you never have my past." Elena laughed softly, standing beside him. "He'll have your strength, though. And your stubbornness." Alessandro turned, his eyes locking with hers. "Then I'll make sure he uses them for love, not war." They stood there for a long while, the three of them bathed in the golden light. The world around them seemed to breathe again, birds returning to the trees, flowers blooming across the garden walls. For once, time felt generous, offering them a moment free from chaos. As evening approached, Elena walked with Luca in her arms, showing him the fountain Alessandro had restored, once cracked from a shootout. Now repaired, its waters flowing clear again. She smiled. "You really did fix everything, didn't you?" Alessandro stepped beside her, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "Not everything. Some things I can never undo. But I can make sure the future doesn't repeat it." Elena turned to him, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "That's all I ever wanted, Alessandro. Not perfection, just peace." He nodded, his gaze softening. "Then peace is what I'll give you." The baby yawned, his tiny face nestled against Elena's shoulder. Alessandro reached out, brushing his son's hair gently. "Sleep, little one. The world outside may be cruel, but here, you're safe." The evening breeze carried their laughter through the garden, past the marble statues and the old iron gates that had once guarded secrets darker than the night. But now, those same walls echoed with love, with life, and as the stars began to appear, Alessandro slipped an arm around Elena's waist, pulling her close. "You know," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "For a man who spent his life fighting wars, I think this might be the first time I've truly won." Elena smiled against his chest, her voice barely audible. "Then hold on to your victory, my love. Because this time, you fought for the right reason." He kissed her hair, closing his eyes as Luca let out a sleepy sigh between them. For the first time, Alessandro Romano, once the most feared name in Italy, felt the weight of his crown lift. Power had once defined him, but love had finally redeemed him. Night descended softly over the Romano estate, wrapping the gardens in a hush of silver moonlight. The house that once trembled with the weight of crime and power now pulsed with something entirely new, warmth. From the nursery came the faint lullaby of Elena's voice, tender and steady, soothing their son into dreams. Alessandro stood in the doorway, his shoulder against the frame, watching her sway gently with Luca in her arms. The soft lamplight painted her face in gold, and for a fleeting second, he wondered how he ever survived the years without her. Her voice faded as she looked down at their son, whispering something only a mother would say, a promise, a prayer. Then she turned, smiling when she saw Alessandro standing there, silent and entranced. "He's asleep," she whispered, placing Luca gently in his crib. "Even warriors need rest." Alessandro chuckled softly, stepping into the room. "And his father could use some too." Elena brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "You haven't slept properly in days. You still wake up in the middle of the night, checking the windows, the doors." He sighed, his eyes lowering. "It's hard to unlearn a life built on fear. Every sound still feels like danger. Every quiet moment feels like the calm before something bad." She took his hand, squeezing it. "Then let me teach you what peace sounds like." They stood together, listening, the slow ticking of the old clock, the gentle rhythm of Luca's breathing, the wind whispering through the olive trees outside. For Alessandro, it was a new kind of music, one without screams, without sirens, without blood. Just life. He looked at her, his eyes glistening. "You know, when I first built this empire, I thought power meant protection. I believed if I controlled everything, no one could ever hurt the people I loved. But I was wrong. Power didn't protect me. It isolated me." Elena smiled faintly. "And now?" He glanced at the sleeping baby, his voice softening. "Now I see that love protects better than fear ever could." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "That's the man I always believed was still in you." For a while, they simply stood there, wrapped in quiet understanding. Then Alessandro reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena blinked, startled. "What is this?" She whispered that he opened it slowly, revealing a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no extravagance, just purity. "This was supposed to be yours," he said. "I bought it 2 years ago. The day before you left. I wanted to ask you to stay, but I didn't deserve to." Elena's breath caught. "Alessandro." He took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. "But I'm asking now, not as the man I was, but as the man I want to be. Stay. Build this life with me. Not behind walls of money and guards, but as my family. My home." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she whispered, "I never truly left, Alessandro. My heart was always here." He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that softened the scars on his face. "Then maybe this time, we'll do it right." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing. Elena led him to the balcony overlooking the garden, where the scent of wet roses filled the air. The world below shimmered with reflected moonlight, the same place where wars had once been fought, now reborn in peace. Alessandro leaned against the railing, staring at the sky. "You hear that?" he asked. Elena tilted her head. "What?" "The rain. It sounds different tonight." She smiled knowingly. "It sounds like forgiveness." He turned to her, brushing his fingers along her cheek. "I don't know if I'll ever deserve this. You, him, peace. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." "You already have," she whispered, and below them, the fountain's water rippled softly, reflecting their silhouettes, the former king of the underworld and the woman who had made him human again, for the first time. The future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to look forward to. Elena reached for his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "Promise me something," she said quietly, "anything. No more running from who you are. Don't bury your past, just make sure it leads somewhere better." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I promise." As thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Elena smiled. "Then maybe this storm will be our last." They stood there until dawn painted the horizon in pale gold. The world around them began to wake, the garden alive with birds, the air crisp and new. Alessandro felt a strange calm settle inside him. The kind that comes when a man finally lays his ghosts to rest. He looked down at Luca in the crib through the window, small, fragile, but full of possibility, and whispered to himself, "No more blood. Just family." Elena came up beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What did you say?" He smiled, eyes still fixed on their son. "I said, it's finally over." But in truth, he knew it wasn't about ending something. It was about beginning again, not as a mafia boss, not as a man of power, but as a husband, a father, a soul reborn. As the first light of morning spread across the sky, Alessandro kissed Elena's forehead. "You were right," he murmured. "Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave." She smiled through her tears, whispering back, "And now you're the bravest man I know." The fountain's water glimmered beneath the sunrise. The sound of it mingling with their laughter, not of victory, but of peace hard won. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Alessandro Romano, once a name spoken in fear, became something else entirely. A husband, a father, a man reborn through love.